In 2018, a film came out which shook the world, Ari Aster's Hereditary. Now, what's really going on in this movie? What symbolism is it using? And what are we not talking about? Let's find out. The film begins by acknowledging the death of Annie's mum, Ellen, and inside Ellen's box of possessions there is a book titled Notes on Spiritualism. And inside that, Ellen has left a note for Annie. Dark forces are at play, there is a sick plan, and it will involve Annie. My darling, dear, beautiful Annie, forgive me all the things I could not tell you. Please don't hate me, and try not to despair your losses. You will see in the end that they were worth it. Our sacrifice will pale next to the rewards. Love, Mummy. Hereditary is a fractal movie. The same structure is expressed at multiple levels in the story, kind of like a tree. The branch of a tree looks like a miniature version of the whole thing. And writer-director Ari Aster is a master of taking a symbol and weaving it throughout the story, from the scale of individual shots all the way up to the overall narrative. And incidentally, one of the symbols that he permeates throughout the movie is the tree. It's right there on the poster. What is a tree from a symbolic point of view? Well, it begins with a seed, a point-like entity which is practically invisible. And in the ancient worldview, the seed was seen as a heavenly principle, in itself too abstract to be understood. But when it descends from the heavens and is nourished from below by the earth, it grows up to form a stable, branching structure, a tree, and it produces new seeds which lead to new trees. There are good seeds which ultimately produce good fruit, and there are bad seeds which ultimately produce bad fruit. It's no coincidence that when we map out our ancestry, we call that a family tree, because when the seed of a man is received by a woman, this will grow into a new human being, and on it goes the creation of offspring. The first tree is Annie's family tree. She is married to Steve, and they have 2 children, Peter aged 16 and Charlie aged 13. Annie wants them to grow up and flourish. She wants her family to flourish, as most parents do. But there's a problem. There's another tree. One that has been planted by Annie's mother, Ellen, and her accomplices, the tree of Paimon, the demonic entity they worship. His spirit is sown like a seed into the story. At first he's imperceptible, but over the course of the movie, his influence grows, ultimately producing terrible fruit. The mythology in this movie is drawing on writings from the real world. Paimon is first described in a grimoire from the 1600s called Lexici of Solomon. Here's what it says about him. Paimon is very obedient unto Lucifer. He appeareth in the form of a man sitting upon a dromedary, that's a camel, with a crown most glorious upon his head. There goeth before him also a host of spirits, like men with trumpets and well-sounding cymbals, and all other sorts of musical instruments. He hath a great voice, and roareth at his first coming, and his speech is such that the magician cannot well understand unless he can compel him. This spirit can teach all arts and sciences and other secret things. Now if thou callest this spirit Paimon alone, thou must make him some offering. This is dark stuff. The film describes Paimon as one of the 8 kings of hell, and it might be getting that from the Book of Abramelin, which rather dubiously dates itself to 1458. In that book, Paimon is said to be one of the 8 sub-princes of hell. He has 111 spirits in common with 3 other sub-princes, Orions, Araton, and Amaimon. Orions is also known as Samael, one of the entities contained within the Qliphoth, a network of dark elemental forces also known as the Tree of Death. So Paimon is associated with a Tree of Death, and that brings us back to the topic of trees. As we've said, in Hereditary, Annie's family tree is being attacked by Paimon's tree, a Tree of Death. We will now be entering spoiler territory. This is the sigil, the occultic symbol of Paimon, as depicted in Lexici of Solomon, and it features throughout the film. Ellen's necklace, Annie's necklace, which she wears during her mother's funeral, Joan's house, possessions belonging to other members of the coven, and of course on the statue of Paimon at the end of the film. But notice the film's depiction of the symbol is slightly different to the traditional one. It has 3 loops instead of 4, and that reflects some details to the Paimon mythology introduced, it seems, by Ari Aster. He kind of plays fast and loose with it for the purpose of this story. We are shown the following text in another of Ellen's books, titled Invocations. When successfully invoked, King Paimon will possess the most vulnerable host. That's Charlie, in the case of the movie. Only when the ritual is complete will King Paimon be locked into his ordained host. That's Peter. Once locked in, a new ritual is required to unlock the possession. The Goetia, that is, Lesser Key of Solomon, itself makes no mention of King Paimon's face, while other documentation describes him as having a woman's face, while still referring to him using strictly masculine pronouns. As a result, the sexes of the hosts have varied, but the most successful incarnations have been with men, and it is documented that King Paimon has become livid and vengeful when offered a female host. For these reasons, it is imperative to remember that King Paimon is a male, thus covetous of a male human body. And that is the mission of Ellen's coven over the course of the story. Their goal is to get Paimon installed within Peter's body, a young, healthy, male body. But in preparation for that, 3 women will lose their heads as a kind of sacrificial offering to Paimon. Notice the 3 heads dangling at his side in the drawing. And remember Ellen's note to Annie. She says, "Our sacrifice will pale next to the rewards." Indeed, Ellen herself is the first sacrifice. It's not exactly clear how she dies. She seems to die of natural causes. That may or may not have been part of the plan. But in any case, her grave is subsequently dug up by the coven and her head is removed. Her body is placed in the attic of the Graham household, unbeknownst to them for most of the movie.
Your whole family, every member needs to be in the house. Your son, everyone. Very important. Okay?
The second female to lose her head is Charlie, and the third is Annie. 3 heads, 3 women, 3 generations. And this is probably why the film depicts Paimon's sigil with 3 loops. As Matthew Peugeot writes, the head informs the body with meaning and purpose, and the body supports that purpose with power and deeds. So the head rules over the body. It is on the head that a crown is placed. And notice the connection to trees. We refer to the top part of the tree, the branches and the leaves, as the crown. And chopping down a tree removes this crown. It repudiates the tree's action on the world around it. Traditionally, the axe was used as an instrument to behead both trees and humans. And in Hereditary, it is during Charlie's beheading that the tree imagery converges with the head imagery in a shockingly literal way. I vividly remember seeing the film when it came out in the cinema. I was with a couple of friends and it was an evening, June 2018. We went to the Light Cinema in Cambridge, which was our local cinema. And we'd heard some buzz surrounding the film, but nothing prepared me for that scene. I'd never seen anything like it. It was utterly horrific. As we walk through that sequence, and don't worry, I won't go into the grisly details, but notice how it pulls together all the threads we've been talking about so far. Here goes. At a party with Peter, Charlie ends up eating some walnuts, triggering an allergic reaction. As she goes into anaphylactic shock, with Peter driving her to the hospital, she sticks her head out of the window to get some air. At that moment, Peter swerves to avoid a dead deer on the road, bringing the car close to a telephone pole, which decapitates Charlie. It seems like a freak accident, but earlier on we're shown that this telephone pole is engraved with, you guessed it, the sigil of Paimon. You see, dark forces are at work to orchestrate this horrific event. Somehow, it's all part of the demonic plan, perhaps in ways that even the Coven members don't fully understand. The walnuts, the placement of the deer on the road, the placement of the telephone pole marked with Paimon's symbol. So Paimon's Tree of Death enters the story in a catastrophic way through a small, seemingly insignificant seed, the walnut. Because nuts are seeds. And narratively speaking, Paimon's presence in the story grows from that seed into a tree, the telephone pole, which is basically made from a carved tree trunk. And that telephone pole severs a branch from Annie's own family tree and knocks Charlie's head off. And by the end of the film, Paimon dwells within a temple built within the crowns of trees, the tree house, with the severed remains of Annie's family tree scattered all around. Tragically, Paimon's tree wins, and in the crowns of the trees, Peter is crowned as the host of Paimon. So that's the all-consuming growth of Paimon's tree expressed in the story through physical objects, from seed to tree house. Annie is a miniature artist. By that I mean she makes miniature models. I'm not saying that she's small, but notice the model she makes of the collision. The telephone pole is disproportionately large in comparison to the car. Though she may not be able to name it at this point in the film, I think Annie is aware that something is looming over her family. So Charlie's death is a key turning point in the film, and it led to this fan theory. Hereditary was given that title because it was how the young girl died in it. Her head hit a tree. Hereditary. That's actually quite clever. But when Ari Aster was interviewed about it in 2023, he said this.
Ari, you are aware of the joke about the title of Hereditary, aren't you? Which is that Hereditary is called Hereditary because it's a pun on her head hit a tree.
I hadn't heard that. That's the first time.
I gift that to you.
Yes.
Although you never know with Ari. Let's continue. The way Paimon is summoned in this movie, and the impact he has on his hosts, has many of the signs of demonic possession. And this interaction is rather complex. First, how and when does Paimon enter Charlie's body? Some have suggested that it happens when the pigeon smashes into her classroom window, because we then see her cut the head off the pigeon, while a coven member watches from afar. Now, from the rest of the movie, it seems that Paimon is released from a host by the removal of the head. He is then a free-floating spirit until he is implanted in the next host. So maybe the pigeon is the host of Paimon prior to Charlie. That seems to be corroborated by Charlie's drawing of the pigeon's head, wearing a crown, presumably Paimon's crown. However, we do see Charlie acting strangely before the pigeon incident, and we learn that Ellen and the Coven had a lot of access to her as she was growing up. If we do witness the moment of Paimon entering Charlie's body during the film, not much changes in Charlie. In many ways, she is already aligned to Paimon's cause, such was the corrupting influence of her grandmother. How sad it is to see such a young soul claimed by the occult. The next host is Annie, and getting her possessed presents a bit more of a challenge for the Coven. Because unlike Charlie, Annie was estranged from Ellen. She wants nothing to do with Ellen's Coven. So they go undercover, exploiting Annie's grief in the wake of Charlie's death. Joan shows up at Annie's support group, winning Annie's trust through deception. Notice this scene in which Annie encounters Joan in a car park. The sun is shining, Joan greets her warmly. But I'm reminded of the words of 2 Corinthians 11:14, Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. In a brilliant move of visual storytelling demonstrating the true intentions of Joan, we see her ushering Annie out of the sunshine and into the shadow, and she offers a tantalizing possibility of reconnecting with Charlie from beyond the grave. It's interesting, the God of the Bible strongly prohibits attempts to communicate with the dead. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. We read in 1 Samuel 28 of King Saul consulting the medium of Endor in an attempt to communicate with the deceased Samuel. And what's disturbing about that is it works. It seems that Saul really does have a conversation with Samuel from beyond the grave, but this act is a mark of Saul's unfaithfulness to God. So the reason we shouldn't communicate with the dead is not that it's impossible. It is possible, according to scripture. There is life beyond death, and there is a way to participate in that life. But it is emphatically not the way of mediums and spiritists. I guess often these people don't know what they're meddling with, But in Hereditary, Joan knows exactly what she's doing. When she teaches Annie how to perform that seance, she claims that it will allow Annie to speak to Charlie, but really it's to provide a doorway for Paimon. That's my interpretation of all the seances in the movie. At no point are the characters actually speaking with their loved ones from beyond the grave. It is the demon Paimon masquerading as their loved ones. And this allows Paimon to gradually get a foothold on Annie, and he tricks her into thinking that burning Charlie's sketchbook will set fire to her, providing undeniable proof of his existence. But when Annie hurls the sketchbook onto the fire, her husband Steve bursts into flames. And in that moment of severe emotional vulnerability, you see a sudden shift in the countenance of Annie. This is the moment in which Paimon fully enters her body. When Annie beheads herself with a piano wire, Paimon is released once again. Peter flees through the attic window in horror, and the bluish light seen throughout the film converges on him as Paimon enters his body, the final host. This light might point to the possibility that Paimon is a fallen angel. Now, up to this point, the Coven have been preparing Peter to be the final host. The seance in the house seems to affect him as well as Annie. And at school, he is tormented by terrifying visions. He sees a dark portent of what is to come. In this classroom scene, the bluish light that will soon enter his body for real, we see it converge on his reflection in the glass of this bookshelf. We are then shown his reflection, but it's an alternate version of Peter, smiling creepily. Remember, the caption in Ellen's book calls Paimon God of Mischief, and in this moment, Peter is seeing what he is about to become.
Peter just called me, Annie, terrified, crying in the halls, convinced he's being threatened by some vengeful spirit.
It's coming for Peter, and this is foreshadowed in an earlier classroom scene in which he is being taught about Heracles and the nature of fate.
Because he literally refuses to look at all the signs that are being literally handed to him the entire play.
It's a classic horror movie trope. The classroom is often the place where the central character is taught something about the nature of fate.
Fate caught up with several lives here.
It was her fate and she embraced it.
They can deny it, they can ignore it, they can rail against it, but what they can't do is stop it. And there's something terrifying about this idea. Even at school, Peter is being targeted from beyond the school grounds.
I expel you!
The Coven has no regard for Peter himself. To them, he is a soul to be expelled, so that the vessel of his body can be made available for Paimon. So with Peter as the final host, notice how Joan addresses him in the treehouse at the end of the film.
Charlie, you're all right now. You are Paimon, one of the 8 kings of hell. We have looked to the northwest and called you in. We've corrected your first female body and give you now this healthy male host.
She starts by calling him Charlie. It's a really surprising detail. It suggests that while Paimon is occupying a young human body, he is somewhat limited in knowledge, like a child. The Coven actually has to remind him who he is, and I guess up to this point, Charlie's body is what he's most familiar with. So Joan starts by calling him Charlie, and then says, "You are Paimon." So it's a bleak ending. The Coven gets what it wants. Overall, I think it might be a deliberate inversion of the biblical story. Instead of the Holy Spirit descending on Jesus like a dove, we have a demonic spirit descending on Charlie like a pigeon. Christ builds his church on the rock, the Apostle Peter. But Paimon is established on the foundation of this Peter.
We reject the Trinity and pray devoutly to you, great Paimon.
Ellen and Joan and their coven reject the Trinity, the triune God of Christianity, the eternal union of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They reject him. But what does that mean? Do they reject his existence, or do they reject his authority? Because as the book of James says, you believe that there is one God, good. Even the demons believe that, and shudder. And maybe the coven in Hereditary falls into this camp. Maybe they would acknowledge the existence of the triune God, but they refuse to worship him. Their allegiance is to Paimon. In any case, Joan's final monologue reveals their motives.
Give us your knowledge of all secret things. Bring us honor, wealth, and good familiars. Bind all men to our will, as we have bound ourselves for now and ever to yours.
So it's about power and prosperity. They view Paimon as a sort of genie, a figure who can grant their wish for a cost. The cost happens to be multiple human lives and their own souls. Ari Aster himself comes from a Jewish background, and at the time of recording this, he doesn't believe in God. Who knows what his intentions are with the film? Something that can be uncomfortable about his movies is that they sometimes conflate the humorous with the horrifying.
The more horrible, the funnier for me.
And in a strange way, that's part of Hereditary's impact. At the end of the film, we, as an audience, are invited to interrogate our own response to what we're being shown. Do we laugh along with the coven, or are we horrified? Ari Aster is probably more interested in family and how family can go wrong than he is in spirituality. And he's using the language of horror to express family tensions in an especially vivid and visceral way. One of the most uncomfortable scenes in the film is all too grounded and familiar. It's an argument around the family dinner table.
And I know it was an accident, and I know you're in pain, and I wish I could take that away for you. But your sister is dead! And what a waste! If it could have maybe brought us together or something! If you could have just said, I'm sorry!
Even before Paimon enters the stage in a major way, there are plenty of tensions bubbling beneath the surface. Steve is the one who says goodnight to Peter. Annie is the one who says goodnight to Charlie. There's a split. Annie lies to Steve, saying that she's going to the cinema when she's actually going to a grief support group. There's a lack of communication, allowing suspicions to arise. And tragically, the thing that Annie thinks will bring her family together, reconnecting with Charlie, is actually the thing that tears them apart. In this film, there is a supernatural evil presence, yes, but there is also an acknowledgement that we ourselves are broken. Our relationships are not what they should be. Something has gone wrong. The tragic stories we tell, like Hereditary, the stories that end with darkness, they help us to feel the weight of the darkness. The devil seems to have the last laugh in the film, and that's disturbing. It doesn't feel right. It leaves me with a longing for something more, for good to ultimately triumph. And that is the Christian hope, the one true God of the universe, the God fully revealed in Jesus, the Son of the Father, filled with the Spirit. He is good, and Paimon should be afraid of him. When the first Adam went to his tree, he grasped in selfishness, plunging the world into curse. But Jesus, the second Adam, went to his tree, the cross, in self-sacrificial love, taking all of our darkness on himself. The thorns that entered the world as a curse under the first Adam were raised up as a crown on the head of the second Adam, Jesus, as he won the victory over all the twisted structures of the demonic. Having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. I don't know what you make of that, but it's a very different vision, one that our culture has been meditating on for centuries. And Hereditary disturbs us as much as it does, I think, because it is such an overt perversion of the Jesus story. We have a strong sense that this is not the way things should be. Hi, Thomas here. I just want to take this opportunity to say a massive thank you to you, because I'm just a guy who's interested in movies and theology, making videos in my bedroom. And if you had told me a year ago that this channel would get to 25,000 subscribers, I would not have believed you. That's thanks to people like you deciding to stick around for my videos, and for that I'm incredibly grateful. Your presence on this channel is not taken for granted. And it's so lovely to see the same names appearing again and again in the comments. There's a bit of a community forming around this. People like you who are interested in diving into the details of these stories and why they resonate with us. So at this stage, I'd love to put it to you guys. What would you like to see from the channel? let me know in the comments below. There are obviously plenty more films to talk about in videos like these, and that's the plan. Plenty of new ones being made too. I have some ideas for projects in the future, short films and potentially longer films as well, narrative films that kind of try to put into practice some of the things I've learnt from watching all these movies. Also some short kind of horror or sci-fi horror stories that I've been working on. I'd love to get those out at some point. And are there things that we could do together? Because I would love to connect with you guys more and learn from your insights. So I had an idea that we could get some kind of watch party thing up and running. Maybe from time to time we all watch a film together remotely and talk about it. That could be interesting. Or we could go old-fashioned and have, I don't know, a book club or something. So many possibilities. We won't be able to do all of them, but I would love to hear what you think and what you would like to see more from the channel. Let me know in the comments. As I say, one thing that can be challenging on YouTube is so many comments coming in, and sometimes it's hard to catch all of them. So an easy way to get in touch with me and other followers of the channel is to join the Discord community. You can do that right now for free by clicking the link in the description below. And in there we share letterbox accounts and people share things that they've been working on, and we kind of chat about films a bit more. So it's a lot of fun. We'd love to have you with us. I'm excited to see where this goes, and I'm more grateful than I can say to have you along for the ride. So thank you. That's all for now. We'll be back soon. And remember, it's deeper than you think.